Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cassandra Moore from the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch, here to deliver you your Tropical Atlantic Marine Weather Briefing for Thursday, February 2nd, valid through Tuesday, February 7th. Starting with a look at the current surface analysis, there is a stationary front with a 1016 millibar low here in the northwest Gulf of Mexico, and this will be the main weather feature this week. We have high pressure set up over the western Atlantic and a very broad surface trough east of the Leeward Islands. There is currently a gale warning for the southwest Gulf of Mexico, offshore Veracruz, and a gale warning for the Caribbean Sea offshore Colombia due to persistent overnight pulsing gale force winds. And even though we're talking about the Atlantic Basin, there's also this gale warning for the Gulf of Tehuantepec in the Pacific Basin. Here is the current satellite loop. It's pretty quiet in terms of precipitation in the Atlantic, the exception being along the intertropical convergence zone here and some fast moving showers in the Caribbean embedded in the trade winds. Now zooming into the Gulf of Mexico, here's that frontal boundary with the clouds and cold air behind it, and mariners should continue to expect reduced visibility due to some marine fog behind this boundary along the northern Gulf Coast. Moving on to the forecast, a surge of cold air will finally move this cold front across the Gulf of Mexico tonight into tomorrow, with fresh to strong north winds and 10 to 12 foot seas behind it, and gale force winds offshore Veracruz, Mexico. This front will also clean up that marine fog that had been persisting in the northern Gulf. Looking at the Caribbean, a tight pressure gradient over the Caribbean Sea will support fresh to strong winds over the south central and central basin with 10 to 12 foot seas peaking near 12 feet offshore Colombia. And a very similar weather scenario is going to continue throughout the forecast period for this area in the Caribbean. Otherwise, fresh to strong southwest winds and moderate seas ahead of the cold front passage are in the western Atlantic. For the forecast for Saturday, February 4th, there are some fresh winds and moderate seas in the southern and eastern Gulf of Mexico as that front has made its way out of the basin. We still may have some elevated seas here in the southern Bay of Campeche up to 10 feet. And then the front will continue to move east and stretch from the central Atlantic to the northern Bahamas. And as strong high pressure builds in behind the front, we can expect fresh to strong northeast winds and rough seas over the western Atlantic, reaching the Florida Peninsula. Elsewhere, we have those fresh to strong winds in the south central Caribbean continuing and fresh trade winds over the deep tropics supporting 8 to 10 foot seas here. For Sunday, the frontal boundary is now more east to west oriented, north of 25 north in the Atlantic, with fresh to strong east winds and rough seas north of the front. You can see an area above 12 foot seas behind the front here, as well as large swells stretching all the way to the Bahamas. For the rest of the basin, no significant changes other than winds and seas subsiding in the Gulf of Mexico. And keep an eye on this feature here. This low may move out of the Gulf and make its way east into the Atlantic by Monday. Now taking a look at Monday, you can see this trough here as a result of that low moving across Florida and into the western Atlantic. And this could be a weak cold front. We do see fresh to strong southerly winds ahead of this feature, mainly east of 75 west and north of 25 north, while the rest of the Atlantic is seeing this fresh trade wind pattern from the high pressure that has built in. We do have rough seas continuing behind the remnants of the cold front here. And then by Tuesday, that boundary should lift north of the area, and it's going to leave gentle to moderate winds and abating seas in the western Atlantic. Fresh trade winds will prevail across the rest of the Atlantic with elevated seas of 8 to 11 feet here across much of the basin. By next week, there could be another front approaching in the Gulf, shifting winds to southerly and elevating seas. And we also see that fresh to strong trade wind pattern continuing in the south central Caribbean into next week. In summary, we have 2 active gale warnings, one for the southwest Gulf of Mexico offshore Veracruz, where gale force winds will begin Friday morning until Friday evening, and one in the Caribbean Sea offshore Colombia, with gale force winds pulsing overnight tonight. And that cold front is going to move across the Gulf of Mexico, which is going to bring those gale force winds to Veracruz tomorrow and then enter the Atlantic over the weekend. That's all I have for the Atlantic Marine Weather Briefing. The next briefing will be Sunday, February 5th, and you can always get our latest products at www.hurricanes.gov/marine. Thank you.